been nominated in World Heritage Sites in 2015, and some of you probably do know what was a kind of controversial issues on this site about understanding the value and the attributes of this site in those times. There has been a quite deep, big tension mainly between Korean government and the Japanese government, as well as the Chinese government, about the interpreting the site in the process of nomination. This site needed interpretation in the process of preparing nomination, but actually it wasn't enough in that time. So it has been remained as a member state responsibility to recognize different narrative in the presentation in the process of management. This site is a kind of Meiji Industrial Revolution witness of this site, but it has a lot of different stories in terms of especially about the people who worked here, who lived in this place. So that is a kind of area that the two different member states are kind of different perspective on understanding those two sites. Here is another way of understanding those serial nominated sites. The one on the left is shows the time when it was a kind of culmination point, when it was the wealthiest moment of this site. This inside room, you can probably see the color TV, which is 1980s, we believe, but actually this site was nominated because of the Meiji period up to 1910. No later than 1910, the remains was not recognized in the nomination dossier. But actually in the museums, they are presenting the room which shows you the 1980s moment, how wealthy the site was, so that it shows the people who lived in this luxurious place at the flourishing time of the site, 1980s, the people who is alive and remember their good lives in wealthy times. The one on the right is a movie poster which was produced in Korea. So it tells you about the people who lived in the poor and coarse wartime of the history, the people who disappeared without their names recorded, but the anger has imprinted to their grandson generation. After generation, untold and unrecorded story will be forgotten, and we will remember only limited part of our life and memory. Physically, place cannot go back to the time of the past, but our memory and our story and our interpretation can take us to the past to understand our life and history better. In what time in this history and whose story and memory we can speak through interpretation. And that is a kind of question in our center, which is at the center of our research project at the moment. We believe whose story is the most important that we give our attention in the process of interpretation. Here is another story waiting for to be told, which our center has been recently involved until this year. This is the Great Zimbabwe, which is one of the World Heritage Sites in Africa. The site went through the time of the colony when the history of the site was written by colonial authority. It's a story focused on the origin and the people who designed and constructed this iconic town in Africa. The present generation would like to talk about their own understanding of the site which was built by their ancestors, not by the West. The rehabilitation of this great Zimbabwe site is struggling with different perspectives between locals and policymakers. So this case displays careful interpretation is needed after nomination process was done. So WIPIC is involving on those kind of balancing those two different perspectives in the presentation and also the construction of the visitor center at the moment. Now I would like to introduce our new definition, which you might come across in our survey last year and also in our website already. And heritage interpretation is a meaning-making process through communication, participation, and experience. And that is our sentence, which we would like to make it simpler but more flexible to bring up a kind of, different ideas in the process of interpreting. It increases understanding and promotes connections between people and heritage places, which is one of the very key elements that we think is the most important in the defining the sentence. In the decision-making process of what is interpreted and how, it premises heritage interpretation based on an ethical and participatory approach and a consideration of the full range of heritage values. So that is another aspect that we'd like to highlight in our definition sentence. Importantly, I would like to stress again that we would like to understand heritage interpretation is a kind of process, not a kind of simple activity or educational part of these activities. I would like to slight comparison between the past perspective and the perspective that our center and also in general we have at this stage. According to our literature review in our research, we found that existing definition understand heritage interpretation as an educational activity, a process or activity of communication, and occasionally as contributing to the formation of public discourse. In defining new concept of heritage in our center, we respect that heritage interpretation can serve for the educational and communicative functions. However, new definition needs to acknowledge that its multi-layered aspects, complex politics of heritage, and its broader context. So we have identified more clearly about the emerging role of heritage interpretation in new defined concept. First, the heritage interpretation encourages community participation in heritage and sustainable development. Second, it enhances social inclusivity. And third, it also protects traditional skills and knowledge. And fourth, it enhances the identity, branding, and economic benefits of heritage. So a new definition of heritage interpretation has recognized that it differs from a unidirectional educational act, and it has evolved into a process of communication, and even as a part of discourse. Sure that you probably cannot read all of those words, but I will explain to you a bit of briefly. On the left yellow column, you can see the previous definition, which is NMA Charter, that it defines the heritage interpretation and presentation in 2008. And on the right, you can see our new definition, including the heritage presentation, which has been done for the last 2 years by our center. As you know well, the NMA Charter understands interpretation as an activity. And also, it understands presentation as a communication, which is again a part of the activities. However, our definition, which was drafted through 2 years of research and dense discussions with all the different types of experts and internally and externally, highlights that heritage interpretation and presentation is a process. The difference I would like to explain in 4 different areas. The first, our definition reflects the idea that all can do interpretation, not only by the experts, but anyone who do participate and visit the site can interpret the site. Second, our definition sentence includes who can interpret, all, and also what to interpret and how to interpret in a very brief and simple sentence. It states about the necessity of ethical approach, and those aspects will be more clearly stated in upcoming principle of heritage interpretation and presentation, which we are doing at this stage. Third, new definition understands interpretation and presentation as a process rather than activities. And lastly, it recognizes the interpretation is needed in all heritage process. Through this kind of 2 years research, we had a lot of debates whether we have to divide interpretation and presentation, or we have to include presentation into the part of the interpretation. We haven't concluded the answers yet, but most of the experts who has participated in our definition research, they agreed that the interpretation and presentation sometimes happens simultaneously, and sometimes it comes after the interpretation happens first, and then presentation follows by the presentation. So it is quite difficult for us to have a kind of clear cut between defining the interpretation and presentation, but we tried our best to define the presentation is more like a kind of delivering process of interpreted content. I mentioned that we do have the research office, and we all have the 4 people, including me, in our office at the moment, that we are focusing on 3 different areas. The first one is what to interpret, and the second one is who interpret and for whom we interpret. Probably the second subject that we are thinking is a kind of baseline, which is a kind of very fundamental thing in defining the concept and also setting out the principle, and also other research topics that we always have to consider who interpret, by whom, and also for whom interpret, we have to bear in mind in our research. Fundamentally, we have to think about how to interpret, to deliver and share the research outcome with the publics and also interpreters as well. To do this, internally we do have 4 different sections of the research at the moment. So we have partly theory research, we do policy research, and also we do have the thematic research, and we do have the regional issues so that we can have the regional research. So all those kind of 4 different areas and sections should be integrated to think about what to interpret and who interpret, and also how to interpret. So I would like to just briefly share our research outcome on those 3 different topics, and also including our plan for the next few years, including the Interpret Europe together. First, we would like to think about the who interpret, by whom, and also for whom we interpret. We haven't clarified that who is the public, everyone is interpreting, but we haven't go into the deeper research on who interpret and how interpret can be related to what to interpret and how to interpret. But as I mentioned earlier, at the base, the platform of our research, we would like to consider who and by whom and for whom. As you can see in this slide, the heritage process is all about between people and place. Since late of the 1990s, heritage interpretation became a part of interdisciplinary work for educational attainment, closely connected to personal experience in heritage places. Our new definition of heritage interpretation as a meaning-making process intends to strengthen the connection between heritage place and people. For the past decades, the dynamic between place and people has been overlooked until interpretation has become important. In many cases, we have been considering only well-being of heritage or material aspects of heritage under the name of the value-based approach. However, during our discussion of our research, and many of the recent academic writings warns us that we should think of who value the place, how and why we would like to remember, and what meaning and memory we would like to inherit to the next generation. And probably that is the real meaning of the value-based approach. It means that it is right that we aim at conserving its value of the heritage, but it is the value that the people of the past generation wanted to express and deliver, and it is the value that we appreciate and recognize in our generation and pass on to the next generation. And that might be the real meaning of the value-based approach. Here are the 4 key dimensions of World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy. The first one is inclusive social development, and the second one is inclusive economic development, and the third one is environmental sustainability, and fourth one is fostering peace and security. Those are the table that was made by Sarah Colt, who is one of our working group members on the policy research. And it tells you that every single part of those 4 elements, 4 different parts, are related to heritage interpretation, and especially based on the definition as a meaning-making process. Each single subheadings are related to the heritage interpretation. Interpretation can contribute all those areas, and such dimensions are all related to heritage interpretation, precisely heritage as a meaning-making process. So if we do properly the meaning-making process, we can contribute to achieve all those kind of goals. People and community at the center of all dimensions, so moreover, we have to bear in mind that at the center of these all dimensions, there should be the people and the communities. There has been a lot of mentions relating to interpretation and presentation in World Heritage Convention and also operational guidelines for the past years. World Heritage Convention mentions that it should give the cultural and natural heritage a function in the life of the community by educational and informational program to strengthen appreciation and respect by the peoples. And also the operational guidelines notes about the interpretation and presentation in Annex 5 at the part of nomination dossier. But probably the role of interpretation goes beyond what is described in the World Heritage Convention and its operational guidelines. It should and it can help that how people are encouraged to connect to the heritage places so they can give heritage a function in the life of the community. Once the connection between heritage and the community is increased, the community would actively participate to the protection and management, both benefiting to the community and also being benefited by the community. And community can become a real right holders, decision makers, whatever we call, and a beneficiary of the heritage process. Heritage interpretation provides people with meaningful experiences related to heritage when they can gain greater understanding of and connection to the heritage. When heritage interpretation is enacted as a deliberate and planned practice based on learning, communication, psychology, and behavior theories, it can support a change in a person's attitude, fostering an increased appreciation of heritage. Such appreciation can affect to the behavior change to support heritage use, conservation for future generations. And Actually, throughout our research projects, we kind of prove some of the cases shows those kind of evidence. In our research on 2022 and 2023 research on the site of memory especially has a kind of different perspective in the nomination process as well as the management process, has told us that the process of negotiating different perspectives and stories can bring out positive social impacts. Did not have any statistical outcome, but in general analysis of the different cases, during the identification of value, nomination, and management of the site, different stories and perspectives can surely conflict between different peoples and communities. But it can broaden their perspectives, learn about new perspectives. And in some cases, it can contribute to reduce the gap between different perspectives and make them possible to take inclusive approach in interpretation. Also, that kind of appreciation can be springboard for behavior change, not all the time, but in some cases, to support ongoing heritage use and appreciation, as well as its protection and conservation for future generations. So through those kind of research, we have identified that it is better to understand the different narratives, and also those processes can let us to have a kind of connect with the people through the solidarity and increase our capacity of negotiation and contributing to peace building and enriching our interpretation on the sites and the people. There are many things that community can contribute through a meaning-making process. Community can contribute to the significance of heritage places by ascribing more values. They can contribute to the significance of the heritage places by being part of the heritage. Community will and can participate in decision-making. They also can participate in the management of the heritage place. Ultimately, they can be beneficiary of the heritage place and its conservation. Heritage interpretation is a tool and a path for communities to all those kind of contributions and participation. In addition, in the process of heritage interpretation, communities should be part of the decision-making about what to interpret, to whom and how. So it will allow us diverse perspectives to be told, and inclusive interpretation of heritage could be possible. Therefore, right holders, residents, site managers, or anyone should be participating in the interpreting, and for whom in the interpretation as well. Our research strongly highlighted that the heritage communities no longer need to be educated or to have the heritage values delivered to them. Instead, they should be recognized as those who create and interpret heritage values. One of our important research topics is what to interpret. Obviously, value-based approach already told us that value is much important in the meaning-making process. Here are the elements and the requirements of the meaning-making process as we can understand in our center. There are value and attribute at the center, so that is a really important kind of axis and the fundamental platform to understand the site and also in the process of the meaning-making. There is narrative and stories, very much important, based on the credible information, which is the source of information is credible, is very much important, as well as the World Heritage Convention highlights these important issues of the credible information. Value and attributes is an important element in communication and experience. It connects the place and the people, and also the credible source of information can help us to increase the quality of interpretation. In World Heritage System, we call it authenticity. Narrative and stories is directly contributing to meaning-making process. One of the small talk that we have done in our conversation within our research, whether the narrative and stories are different or the same thing, but there are some people has a different understanding on the narrative, are different from stories, so that probably we have to figure out how it works together and how it works differently in the process of the meaning-making process. To understand the value, it is really important that what the value delivers and how those kind of value has been manifested and how those value is becoming understandable to us. So in recent years, World Heritage System are highlighting the value and the attribute. What to interpret is closely related into value and its attribute. It is the essence of heritage and the essence of meaning-making process. Values are very abstract and invisible, as you know. There are so many values which was manifested in heritage from the time when it was made, and also there are also different values or extended values of the contemporary generations. Those values is expressed and conveyed to us through something understandable or visible element, such as building style, local material and color, or natural setting around the city, or layout the city, and traditional techniques and skills also express the values. Function and the use of the district of the city express and convey the value, and the process of developing and maintaining the city is also expressing the value. So that's why we have started the research on the attribute and the relationship between the attribute and the values. The recent publication by ICROM, IUCN, and ICOMOS, which is called Heritage Impact Assessment Guidance, tells the definition of attributes in that way. Attributes are the elements of the heritage place that convey its value and makes them understandable. They can be physical qualities relating to material fabric and other tangible features, but it can be also intangible aspects such as processes, social arrangement, or cultural practices, as well as associations and relationships between the peoples, which are reflected in physical elements of the property. Those attributes are slightly different between the cultural heritage and natural heritage in that guidance. For cultural heritage, buildings or other building structures and their forms, material, design, uses, and so on. For natural heritage, it is more like a kind of specific landscape, features, areas of habitat, flagship species, aspects relating to environment quality, and so on. Other than the tangible and intangible aspects, wider settings is also part of the attribute, so as the view, smells, feelings, and the context with historical thought, theology, and traditions. And even the process of managing the site and the conserving the site is also the part of the attribute as well. So what is the role of the attribute? It can make value understandable through physical aspects and intangible elements. And also it is an essential element to sustain heritage values in impact assessment and also management tool, and it displays the state of conservation. We are thinking at this stage that how those kind of credible information can relate to the value and attributes, and also it links to the narrative, and ultimately it can lead us to the meaning-making process. And that is one of the reasons that we are doing the research in identifying attributes and the relationship between the values and the meaning-making process. are more tables to show how heritage values and attributes are related together, including the credible source and also totality and intactness, which is called integrated in World Heritage System. And also I have mentioned about the different types of attributes of cultural heritage sites and also natural heritage sites here. One of the key issues in our research at this moment that how those kind of information, narrative, story and value attributes through communication of knowledge and experience of the emotions and participation of the people can lead to the meaning-making process. And after the meaning-making process, how they can reflect and how those kind of meaning-making process can impact into the social and environment. So based on those kind of research in the previous years, we are now heading to the more practical research on how to interpret. At theoretical and practical level, heritage field has several areas to challenge, as you know. There has been artificial division between nature and culture, and nature-culture is not two, but one entity that both natural aspects and cultural aspects has formed together our living environment so as heritage. Secondly, there are another artificial division between tangible and intangible heritage. So that is one other aspect that we have to tackle on how to interpret the heritage places. Again, the heritage and the ritual is not two, but one entity, which is not to be separated. So that is one element that we have to bear in mind. And there are so many examples that value of tangible heritage is manifested and conveyed through intangible aspects. Also, the communities is an essential part to achieve sustainable goals. And also, we have spoken out loud that informed conservation and rational decision making with enough information, but has been failed to place a balanced role of expert and other knowledge holders. So that is one aspect that we have to sort out in the process of thinking about how to interpret the site. Other aspects that we are bearing in mind in our center is integrating all heritage process through the interpretation so that we can do better the meaning-making process in heritage process. Also, we are not trying to use the inclusive heritage interpretation because that is kind of mandatory that we have to bear in mind. So inclusive means there is exclusive, so we would like to slightly avoid the inclusive heritage interpretation as a word. Also, we consider a way of ethical approach to interpreting on what to interpret and how to do it. You probably do know that the Steve Slack in his book has, there are many enriching ideas, such as the interpretation is a science to be studied and is an art, and also an interpreter is intuitive and inspirational. So bearing in mind that our new research projects on setting out the principle, we are aiming to guide how to think, not what to think or what to do or how to do. We are aiming at increasing our knowledge and ability to increase our knowledge on our life, our environment and history. And also we are aiming at to enhance our ability on resilience, forgiveness, diversity and peace through heritage. And those are the key things that we are focusing in our research at the moment. This is a kind of brief ideas to tell you that how all different research in our office are integrating on how to interpret and what to interpret and for whom interpret. One of our center's mandate is sharing the ideas and also talking to each other so that we do have a lot of different capacity building programs, mainly in Africa at the moment and also Arab regions, because that is a kind of priority area for our center. We do have a lot of publications and all of our publication is on our website at the moment, so that you can probably give us the feedback, your ideas,